now ready to create some dimensions. We got done making some text and doing our text style, and that needs to be done before you can do dimensions, because obviously dimensions have text, even if it is mostly numbers. So let's jump into dimensioning our drawing. So I'm basically just continuing with the last one that we did. So all the text is in there, it's ready to go. And the first thing that I need to do is actually create a new layer for dimensions. So I'm going to go to my Home tab. I'm going to go to the layer properties like we've been doing. I'm going to go to where it says add, so I can add a new layer. And I'm going to add the layer dim. It's short for dimensions. I could type it all out, but for this example, I'm going to do what I normally do. I just put dim, and I'm going to hit enter, and then I get hit enter again. The reason is I want to actually create another layer called title. I want to go back and make my titles of my rooms stand out differently. I'll show you why in a minute. But I'm going to go to the side, and I'm going to make sure I set those colors. For the dim style, I'm going to select the color of 11. It's kind of like a peachy color. It stands out differently than the others. And then for the title, I am going to go over to the color and select number 4, which is cyan. And then I'm going to say OK. Now, I could actually create my dim layer to be current, but I also want to just do an adjustment with my floor plan. So I'm actually going to go down here to the walls, and I'm going to double click that to make that one the one current, since I'm here. I'm going to close this out, and now what I actually want to do is I want to change these titles to be on the title layer. I am going to show you how they just match my other text. And sometimes when I begin to get a lot of text, I need to see which one is which, even though I can see they're different heights. So I'm going to go back to the model, and I'm just going to click all 3 of the titles: bedroom, bath, and closet. And then with my quick properties, I'm going to go where it says layer and switch it from text by clicking here, going to the down arrow and selecting title. And then I'm going to basically close that up with hitting escape. Now when I go back to my paperspace, I can see those room titles differently than my other normal text just by going through all 3 of the layouts. That will help me later when I have more going on and it gets more crowded. And now, like I said, I want to actually add an angle here in the room, so I can show you angle dimensions as well. So what I'm going to do is go up to the line command. I'm going to hover, so it's just kind of going to be a place to start with, so that it's going to be even with the edge of that shower. Just hovering, bringing it over to the left and click. And then I'm going to make sure that my polar is on. So my polar tracking is on. It will draw it at 45 degrees. That's what I have it set for. So I pull it out and I say 3 feet and enter, just kind of a review, and pull it back along that green tracking line, let it hit my other wall and click, and then I'm going to hit enter. So obviously this title might be a problem, but let's go ahead and finish the walls. So I'm going to go to offset, and I'm going to say the walls are 4 inches thick. So I'm going to say 4 and enter. And then I'm going to select this line and pull it in. Ooh, didn't even pull it in, did it? It snapped to probably an O snap on this side. That's okay. I'm going to click it again, pull on the inside, click this one, pull it on the inside. I can see it's trying to snap over here to my title. And then I'm going to hit enter. Obviously, I need to get rid of this one 2 ways: erase or delete. So I'm going to go to erase and select it, and then hit enter. And then the wonderful command trim, I'm going to go to that, and I'm basically going to trim these extra lines so that it just makes those walls connect with the other wall. Now, what I need to do is find out what is the scale of the drawing that I want to show my dimensions. I want the dimensions to show here, and I want them to also show here. Those are both if we click that viewport again, those are both at a 1/4 inch scale. So you need to know that before you start. I'm going to go back later and maybe create some for these two scales, but the most important one I want to start with is that 1/4 inch scale. So going back to my model, the first thing I need to do, just like we did with text, is what? Hopefully you said to change the annotation scale. So if it was on 1/4 inch, I'd be ready to go. But I do need to go down here where it says annotation scale and click the down arrow and change it to a 1/4 inch equals a foot. And yes, my text will change because I do have some text with that scale. So now I'm technically ready to actually start, except for one last thing, and that is I need to get on the right layer. So I'm going to go up to where it says walls for my layer and click down and select the dim. Now I'm technically ready to go. So the next thing I need to do is actually create a dimension style. So I'm going to go back to my annotate tab. And remember, we skipped right over this section, which was dimensions. But do you remember how we created a style for both text and multi-leaders? We went to that bottom little arrow at the corner, right? For both the text and the multi-leader. I'm going to do the same thing with dimensions. So I'm going to go to the bottom right corner, right here, hit the arrow, and the Dimension Style Manager pops up for me. Now remember, with text, we have two different ones built into AutoCAD, the annotative and the standard. Let me tell you right now, if you're only going to show it on one scale drawing, you may just want to go with standard and then just do all your dimensioning on the paper space. So you don't have to do that math to figure out the scale. But because I'm going to show it at different scales on the same drawing, I am going to use annotative. And I will say that is the way that most companies and firms will use the annotative rather than the standard. So let's use the annotative. I'm going to click that one and say a new. Don't want to mess up the default. And then over here, it wants me to give it a name. So I'm going to give it a name of Stylus. And just so that I remember, I'm actually going to put the anno after it. You don't have to, because technically it's going to show me the little icon. But just for this example, so I remember, just kind of reinforce it, I am going to put the name after it. And then notice I have two places that tell me it is annotative. It kind of like lets you know, right? Let me bring your attention to this real quickly. This will be for all my dimensions. This is standard. This is what I mostly use. But if I click this, notice I could have different dimension styles according to the dimensions I'm going to do. I could start with one that's for all my dimensions and then come back and say, yeah, but for my radius dimensions, I actually want to create one a little different. So I could go back and click that and then keep going. We're going to use all dimensions. And then I'm going to say continue. And it brings up the new dimension style box. Please don't let this intimidate you. We're going to go through the first of these tabs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But let's go to the beginning and let's go through lines. So sometimes I will admit I use my dimension lines by block, but I actually prefer to change it to be by layer. That way I don't have to worry about being on the wrong layer or forgetting something. It's set to go. And I can see it starting all the way already on the right. So my dimension lines are going to be by layer for the color. These are fine for the line weight and the line type. And the baseline spacing, I don't need to worry about because that's for mechanical as well. So let's go down to extension lines. Extension lines are the lines that go from your object up to the actual dimension line. Like over here, this is the dimension line that's already by layer color, and these are those extension lines. So the extension line, yes, I want to switch to by layer as well. I can see it changing over here. And then I don't need to worry about this stuff over here underneath, but over here, extend beyond dimension lines. So how far do I want it to go from that dimension line beyond it? So like that little bitty piece at the end. You do want it to actually go beyond it. So you don't want it to just stop right at that dimension line. In other words, you don't want that to be 0. That's not the architectural style of doing that. So normally I make it about the same as my text height, which is going to be 1/8 of an inch. So in this case, I'm just going to make it a little shorter. Let's not get too carried away, right? So then let's go to the next tab, which is symbols and arrows. So the arrowheads. Right now it has a simple closed filled arrowhead. That's not what is used architecturally. It's used a lot for mechanical. So I actually want to go to the one, and there's 2 of them, the architectural tick or the oblique. Notice they look very similar, but the architectural tick is just a little thicker than the oblique. So most of the time for interior designers, oblique is used, especially when you have a lot of dimensions. I will say that I go back and forth. We're going to use oblique. I can skip over the leader because we're going to have that with our multi-leaders. My arrow size, that basically means what size of that tick that I want it to be. It's kind of like an arrow. I'm going to make that match my text height. So I am going to make sure that that is 1/8 of an inch high. I can skip over the mark, the break, the symbol. We mostly don't do arc links. The rest of that stuff is good to go. So now I'm going to go to the text tab. This one's vitally important because I want to make sure my text style is the text style I created, which was stylus. So I want to make sure that that is set and ready to go. Text color, yeah, I want it to match what I have going on. So I'm going to say by layer. I don't need to worry about a fill color, but I do need to make sure the text height is the height that I want it to be. This 3/16 would be if I want it to be as big as my titles. Obviously I don't. I want to make it 1/8 of an inch, a little bit smaller. And to be honest, I normally have that at 3/32 for my drawings. We'll use 1/8 because that's what we've been using for this entire example. This also is important down here, the text placement. Architecturals, they changed the vertical to not be centered, so it's not going to be centered within the line, it's actually going to be above the line. So I need to make sure and change that vertical to be above the line. The horizontal, meaning along that line, yes, I still want it to be centered, so I'm not going to change that. Offset, I'm not going to change that either. I'm going to let AutoCAD just keep its default. But over here on the text alignment, I don't want my text to be horizontal no matter what direction I go. I want it to align with that dimension line. That is standard for architectural and interior designers. So it's aligned and above now for all of my dimensions. Vitally important. I'm going to go to the Fit tab, and there's a lot of differences between these on which is best and which is not, but let me say that I always like to keep my text between the extension lines if it'll fit. So this is basically my fit options. How is it going to fit? Am I going to get rid of the text? Am I going to keep it? I'm going to keep the arrows. I always want to keep it between if it can't. But if it can. If it can't though, what is my next option? So sometimes I do it with a leader, sometimes I don't. For your example, we're going to use a leader so that we always have a line coming off of it. This is where another place I can double check to see if it's annotative. And the only other thing with the fine tuning is I do want to make sure and check that I want a dimension line between the extension lines, so I don't have a gap that forms just because it's a small dimension. Last one that we're going to actually look at is the primary units up here at the top. Obviously for architectural drawings of any sort, it would not be decimal. That would not work. See how it's looking over here? So I need to change that from decimal to architectural. Then it'll tell me my feet and my inches. And I personally like it to not be horizontal, but to be diagonal dimensions. It does seem to be the preference of the industry. These we don't need to worry about for right now because we don't want something in front of it. We don't want something behind it. So we're just going to keep that the way it is. We do want to make the scale factor of 1 so that it'll work for our annotative scale. But down here is kind of important. What this basically means is, do I want to zero suppress, or do I want to suppress the zero in some situations? So we have to kind of think about this. If I have a dimension that's only 6 inches, do I want it to say 0 feet 6 inches? And see if you can watch this one change up here at the top. If I uncheck it, notice it adds a 0. 0 feet 6 inches. Oh my goodness, that would be so crowded if I only had a bunch of inches. So I do want to make sure that one is checked. But this other one is also important. Do I want it to show that if it's 0 inches, I do say 0 inches? Actually, yes. So if a wall is 11 feet 0 inches, I don't want it to just say 11 feet. I do want it to show the contractor and for any of the cabinet people that yes, it does have 0 inches. So I'm going to uncheck that one. Hopefully that makes sense to you. The other things we don't need to worry about because we don't need alternate units or tolerances. So I'm going to hit OK down here at the bottom. I'm going to make sure that's still highlighted on the left, and I'm going to say set current, and I'm going to say close. I want to make sure my annotative scale is 1/4 inch. So I go down here before I do any dimensions and check that. Is my annotative scale 1/4 inch? Yes. I'm set to go. So now I'm ready to actually draw those dimensions. So the easiest way to do that is to go up to dimensions right here and notice linear is ready to go. I'm going to show you this one in just a little bit, but I'm going to tell you that sometimes that gives me problems. It's the quick way. It is not always the quick way. So linear is where I need to go to. It's already set. It's ready to go. And the way dimensions work is you put the overall dimensions of something, like the walls, out the furthest and put the other little dimensions closer into your object. So let's do the overall. So when I click linear, it basically asks me to select my first point of what I want to dimension. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select this corner. I do have my O snaps on. Please remember that those actually do need to be on, so that does need to be blue, so it will snap to your points. It kind of makes sense, right? So I'm going to let it snap to this corner, and I'm going to click with my left mouse. Then I'm going to go up here, and I'm basically going to click with my left mouse again, and it's saying, oh, you want to dimension that entire wall. And then I know that some firms make it very particular on how far out to go, but just know that you can kind of eyeball it. I know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I'm going to eyeball it. I'm going to pull it out, a reasonable length from it, knowing that I'm going to have another line of dimensions closer in. So I'm going to pull it about to here. Dimensions set to go. Let's do the top over here. Same thing. I'm just going to hit enter again to restart the command. I'm going to select basically this point at the end and this point at this end, pull it out a little bit, about the same distance as the other one, and then I'm going to click. And that just sets the position of it. But what about for like windows and doors and walls? Those are placed closer in. I do not want to actually have those on the outside because they would cross over that dimension line. Let me just show you an example if I did that. If I went from here to like the middle of the window and then said I wanted to place it out here and clicked, notice what's going on. there's a confusion here because it's like, okay, does this 19.6 go to this point or does it go all the way to the end? People don't, contractors, designers, that is a huge no-no. I can actually have it cross my other lines, but the dimension line cannot cross through those extension lines. So let's undo that. I'm going to make sure those are on the inside. So I'm going to go to linear again. I'm going to click the end. And yes, there are two ways of doing windows. You could actually go to the edge and then come out, and then to go to the other edge and come out. Let me say that if you do that, there's more dimensions. And usually the window sizes are called out in either a window schedule or with a tag. So the preference is to actually snap in the midpoint of the window. So I'm going to let it snap to that, and then I'm going to pull my dimension out and click. I'm just having it a little bit distance away. Now this is readable and this is readable. Now the magic button to continue on and to do more dimensions along the same exact line is to hit the continue button, what happens to be right here. Beautiful button. When I click that, it'll basically continue from where I left off. So from the middle of the window to the next middle of the window, I just make sure I get that midpoint showing, and I click with my left mouse. It continues on the same line, which is the preference and the drafting standard. So then I just continue and I go to the end and I say click. And then I just hit enter to get out of it. It's asking me, do I want to continue with another one? I don't, so I'm going to hit enter again. But now I have both my windows and my overall dimensions labeled. I could be doing this from the inside of the room instead. So let's go over to this other side and maybe do that here. I need to dimension also to these walls. I don't have an overall dimension here. I could. It would just match this one over here. But let's dimension these walls, okay? And let's actually dimension a little differently. So I'm going to go to linear, same like we've been doing. I'm going to start from the outside, okay? And then I'm going to go to maybe one side of this wall. It really doesn't matter unless you have a complicated dimension that would take up more space. So I'm just going to go to this side, and I'm going to pull it out. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. Do I pull it closer in and have my text be sitting on the outside, or do I pull it out? I will say that most of the time I have my text coming on the outside, but let's pull the dimension line to the outside for right now. So it's clear of the notes. It's not going to conflict them. You sure don't want to put it here. Then nobody would be able to read anything. But I'm going to pull it just so it's a little bit clear of that note. And I'm going to click. Now I'm going to hit continue. And I'm going to go up here. And this time I need to give the dimension of the wall in the closet. And this is a chance also to show the thickness of the wall. So I'm going to click the inside line of the closet, and it's still letting me continue. So I could do that. I could actually go and say, you know what? I want to go to the outside. If I do that, it'll say, okay, the thickness of the wall is 6 inches, right? I still got my dimension line going, so I do have to hit enter to finish it and enter again because it still wants to continue. But I actually want this to have a note with it. So instead of just saying 6 inches, I want everyone to know that the typical thickness of the wall is 6 inches. So I need to add the actual word typical, or TYP, period. So I'm actually going to delete just the 6 inch so that I can add a text, because it won't let you with doing continue. I'm going to go back to linear, just like we've been doing. No big deal. And I'm going to say I want a dimension from here to here. Now, because it's linear, it doesn't figure out the actual distance along that angled line. It just does the vertical or the horizontal. So it depends on which way you pull it. If I pull it this way, it'll do the vertical dimension. If I pull it this way, it's doing the horizontal. Happens to be the same dimension, but that doesn't matter. Notice before I click where I want this dimension line to be, I have these options down here. I could actually force it to go horizontal or vertical by selecting that, like if it has trouble deciding which way you want to go. I could also add some M text or some just plain text to it. So if I actually select M or click M text, it now kind of highlights my text. And I'm sorry, it gets very small when it does this, so it's harder to see. But what it's doing is it's pulsing before the 6 inches. So if I want to add a text before, I just type it. I could type in, let's do it all caps. I could type in tip or typical and a period and maybe even a space. And then it'll say, okay, you want it to say typical 6 inches. Notice I'm not changing the dimension. That is crucial. Don't change it. So then I just click out of it. It's actually added that text to it, tip 6 inches. And then all it wants me to do is say, okay, where do you want it? So I line it up. I don't pull it out here and put it not lined up with the rest. I actually line it up with the line and click again. Now technically, I didn't want it to do that. I wanted it to say 6 inch typical instead of typical 6 inches. So I'm going to undo that and show you how you can add it to the end. That gets a little trickier. But I'm going to go to linear, same thing. I'm going to click here and I'm going to click here. I'm going to start pulling it out. I am going to go down and make sure I can add an M text. So in this way, I'm going to hit M and enter. And it's doing the same thing. It's pulsing at the front of the 6 inches. But if I click anywhere within the text, I can't click outside of it because it'll just ignore that I want a text. But if I click within the text, it highlights my dimension. Now, I do not want to change the dimension, even if it's wrong. Even if it's wrong, I don't want to change it. Let me repeat that. If your dimension is wrong, you do not change it. You just go back and fix your drawing so that it'll be correct. But if I start typing, notice what happens. If I start typing typical, my dimension is gone. It will actually get rid of it. It will just put the word typical. I don't want that. So the way to force it to keep the dimension is to do the left angle. Hopefully you can see that. And then as soon as I do the next one, it's going to change and show my dimension. So I do the left angle and then I do the right angle. I know you couldn't see me type that, but if you do the left angle and the right angle, it'll show the dimension all over again. It's saying, oh, you want to keep that dimension. Yes, I do. Now it's at the end of that dimension, and I can hit a space, and I can say TYP period. That's exactly what I want it to show. So then I'm going to click outside of that texting. I can't hit enter. I'm going to click outside of it, and I'm ready to put that lined with my line. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click on the line, and it's lined up with the rest of my dimensions. Now let's say that, you know what, this is too crowded. Let's say that I want it to maybe be out here, maybe where I can read it better. You can do that, which is way cool. I can click this, and notice as soon as I click this and just even hover at that little grip, I have all these options. Stretch, move with dimension line, which basically just moves the entire thing. Move text only. Move with leader. Above dimension line, it's already there. And these others you normally don't have to work with. But move text only or move with leader, I do this a lot. Sometimes I just move the text. So I can say move text only, and it'll let me basically put it wherever I want. I could put it underneath, I could put it off to the side, I could put it over here. If I just clicked over here, it would just move the text over here. It's not as great as maybe move with leader. So I'm going to show you that one. Move with leader. I'm just going to hover at that grip and go to move with leader. That one actually creates a leader line with my text. So this is where you kind of have to force it to get far enough away. If I just click here, it's not long enough to actually create a leader. So it won't do it for me. But as soon as I start getting further away, whether along the line or above it, it will create a leader for me. So then it's like, well, do I want it to go up at an angle like this? Which is kind of hard to keep doing because it wants to keep bringing up that box. But you can see the angle line. And yes, it's just a matter of getting that angle line to show. So do I want it at an angle, or do I want it maybe straight with that dimension line? So then I have to kind of pull it out far enough so I can actually see that line, because if I pull it too close, it disappears. So if I wanted it to just go off to the side, I would make sure the line's showing, and then I click with my left mouse. And then it's basically doing exactly what I ask it to do. It's saying, yes, this dimension is 6 inches typical. So then I can zoom out. So those are some options that you can do, kind of like fine-tuning your dimensions. But what if what I actually needed to do was create an angle line? Let's look at some other ways that we can do dimensions. Underneath linear over here are your other options. So if I hit the down arrow, I see a bunch. Aligned is basically a dimension aligned with another angle besides a straight linear line. So I'm going to select that one, and I'm just going to kind of zoom in over here. And I'm also going to say, you know what, I need to tell them how far this wall comes into the room. So I'm going to click on this end, and I'm going to click on this end, and I can pull it out. Now I will tell you that if you select on either side of the wall and not along the same line, it'll give the wrong dimensions. So before I click this, let me show you an example. If I go to aligned and select this part and then the inside, notice how it's not really aligned with the outside line. It's just following the 2 clicks that you did and making a line that basically lines up between those 2 clicks like that. So when you pull it out, it's the wrong dimension. So I'm going to hit escape. But I'm going to go to aligned again, and I'm going to click this point and this point. I just bring it out and I click again. And basically I've got my aligned. I could do it for the other side as well, but that shows you, right? Let's look at the next one, which is angular. This is if you want to pull out an angular dimension. So with this one, I click that. It basically wants the 2 lines that make an angle. So I need to click this line and this line, and notice what it does. It will pull it out as far as you want it or as close as you want it. But it basically tells the people what is that angle. So then all I have to do is place it. So I'm going to click, and it's placed my angular dimension for those 2 lines. Going down the list, arc length, I'll have to admit, that's not done very often, but if you do have an arc, it will tell you the length of it. But let's skip over that, and let's skip over radius for right now and go to diameter. What if the client actually wanted to know the diameter of this table that I have in my room? Okay, I'm going to go to diameter, I'm going to click the table, and then I'm going to click. Now, I will say that sometimes when you click, your dimension, I was actually expecting it to do this, might be like this. Maybe it's in the way of something else. Maybe it came out like this instead. If that happens, you probably saw me just do how to change that. But I click the dimension, I basically click this grip, and I pull it the way that I actually want it to come off of that dining table. If I want it to be up here, I would just click here. If I want it to actually be down here, I would just click down here. And it's basically pulling the dimension out from my table and saying this is a diameter, there's the diameter symbol, of 4 feet. And then I can just hit escape. So that's how I would do a diameter. Let's say that I actually needed a radius. Now I could do the same thing on this one. I could actually go to the radius and I could say, you know what, I need this to actually say the radius instead of the diameter. I could do that as well, just by clicking the circle and then clicking where I want it. But let's say that I wanted a radius maybe of this corner over here. Maybe this actually had a radius to it. If I go back and actually force that to be a radius with a fillet and then select, an R, so I'm giving the radius, and enter, and then it looks like it's set for 2 inches. What if I actually have it at 1 foot and enter? And this actually had a radius to it. Now notice the other dimensions, because they're linear, they still snapped to those lines. So I still have the correct dimension, but now I just have a radius corner on there. Same thing, I would go to my Annotate tab, and I would go to Radius, and I would just select that little edge, and then pull it out. And then it tells the people, oh, there's a radius of 1. Okay. Before I get any further, let's dimension this line, because there's some walls in here that are not called out as to how far they are. And let's actually go to this side and continue with these walls and doors and windows, because we never did a door. So for this one, if I actually snapped in the middle of that line, it would give me the wrong dimension. Let me show you. I'm going to go back over here where it now says radius, and I'm going to click and go to linear, and I'm going to click this point into the middle of my window. I'm going to pull my line out a little bit and click, and then I'm going to hit continue. But notice, if I snap to the midpoint of that door, it gets a very weird dimension, because what it's doing is it's going to the midpoint between here and here. So that's along an angle. It's not the accurate dimension of that to the middle of that door. Notice how it says 7 feet 1 and 11/16. I'm going to hit escape. What I like to do is I like to draw a line right here. Line from here to here. And then let's go back to our dimensioning. This is where I can show you maybe how to get back to that continue when you've already gotten out of it. And actually, to do that, let me dimension something else real quickly, just to show you how I can get back to that other one. Let's go ahead and dimension this wall. Just as another example, I'm going to go back to Annotate. I'm going to go back to Linear. I'm going to select basically where the wall is straight. So I'm going to let it click here. I have to click on one side of the wall. So let's say that I wanted to go to the inside of this wall, and then I just pull it out, just like we've been doing. And I'm going to hit continue, and I'm going to continue to the end and click, and then I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to hit enter again, because it's still trying to continue. But let's say, okay, now I want to continue with this one. I've got my line in, I'm ready to snap to the middle of that door. I'm going to go to continue. Now basically what's happening, if I zoom out, is it's trying to continue with the last one I did, which happens to be this one, right? Well, I don't want it to continue with that one. I want to continue with this one. Notice my selection down here. I can say select. So I can say S and enter, and then it's saying, okay, which one do you want to continue? Well, I want to continue this one. So I'm going to select it, and then it will continue from where I left off on this one. Way cool. So I'm going to click now to the midpoint of the door. Notice it's not 7 feet 1 and 11/16. It's 7 feet, just like it's supposed to say, because it's right in the midpoint between these 2 points. So I'm going to click, and then I need to call out the dimension of this wall. There is no, well, is it up here at the top? Yeah, we just did that one. But let's say I want to call it out down here as well. You can pick either this side, you can pick this side. It's kind of a, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click to the end, and I'm going to hit enter. Now, hitting enter again, I have a lot of dimensions showing, correct? So let's actually see what's going on the paper space, because we've been doing this all in model space and haven't even looked to see if it's coming out right on our paper. So I'm going to go to the A1 sheet, and I'm going to click, and oh no, some of my dimensions aren't showing. Well, do you know why? I mean, I did them all, right? And I did them at the right scale, but some of them look to be cut off. Well, it's just my viewport. So don't forget that sometimes there's adjustments that need to be made. So I'm going to click my viewport, and with my grips, I'm basically just going to pull it out a little so that I make sure and see all my dimensions. And boy, that gets in the way sometimes, doesn't it? It looks like it's still cut off at the top, so I'm going to pull it just a little bit more. It's definitely cut off at the bottom, so I'm going to pull that a little bit out. Now, if I wanted to add more dimensions, I may want to stretch it out even further, but it looks like everything is good to go. So I'm going to hit escape. Now, if I wanted this to be out of the way, this was actually created in the paper space. So I could just pull this grip and say, you know what, I actually need it to be maybe at the bottom of my paper instead of further up. So I just do that. Let's go to A2. A2 looks good. My viewport was already pulled out. A3, no dimensions, because we only created them for the 1/4 inch scale. Now I do see some problems. I do see that text going into the walls. These are something that you do need to correct. I also see nightstand right in the way of that dimension. So this is where you have to look at your drawings and say, okay, what do I need to fix? Well, these 2 notes were created in paper space. So right here, I could click this note and I could pull it out of the way. Basically out of the way of that radius. I am going to pull it to here. Now that overlaps with the other one. See that? So I am going to make sure and click the desk, and I'm going to pull this one just a little bit further up. And maybe, that always gets in the way, maybe I could pull this arrow a little bit as well, just so that all those things can be read on my drawing. And then that bedroom, yeah, that text basically needs to be moved. But that's where it gets a little tricky, because I actually have 2 scales of the same text. So right now, I'm in the annotation scale of a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to make sure that that one is moved over here. This one is still overlapped. So if I hit escape and click this, I still can't grip it. There's no grip on this one because it's the different scale. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to change my scale, my annotative scale, to what the scale of that text is, which happens to be the 3/8. Oh, nope, it wasn't 3/8, sorry. It was the 3/16. Remember that? So once I click that, then that text will appear. And I can click that text and say, you know what, I need you moved out of the way as well. Maybe I actually want this one moved down here instead. So they're totally different. Let's go back and see if that actually worked. So going to paper space, there's those titles. Nothing's crossing my text. Going to A2, same thing. Everything's out of the way. But do you see a problem here that just appeared for itself? This right here. Remember, that table is not in this drawing. This is something that you have to be aware of when you're doing annotative scale texting or dimensioning, is what applies to all of the drawings. That table is not there. So I need to go back to model space and say, you know what? I can't use the annotative scale there for this because it doesn't show in one of my drawings. But I have two options. One is I can create a totally different layer and still use annotative dimensioning, and just put it back on there on a different layer that would only be shown on this sheet. That's one option. Another option, going back to the model, is erasing both of those. Now they will not show on the ones where they don't apply, like this sheet, right? This sheet, it was fine, but I still need it on that sheet. Well, this is where I can just stay in paperspace, and I can go up to dimension, and I can go down and I can say, okay, I need that diameter to be showing. So I go to diameter, I select the table, and I click, and now I have that dimension shown just for this drawing. So keep in mind that you do kind of have to be careful on what is showing and what you don't want to show. So now this one is much better. A2, yes, everything is clear. There's no text or dimension going over each other. But what if I wanted some dimensions on this one? What if I actually wanted to show these at this scale? Well, I can actually do that. What if, for example's sake, these two things weren't even here? Let's actually go to the home and move these two viewports. I'm going to click this viewport and hit enter and click a spot and just basically move it off the sheet. Let me tell you, this is a wonderful way to keep things but not have them show. Let's say that sometimes they need to see this detail and sometimes they don't. I don't want to have to redo this maybe later, so I'm just going to move it off my sheet. It still exists in my drawing. It still is a viewport with all of the text and all of the information. It just won't show when I do print because this is my paper. Now let's say I want those dimensions to actually show on this one. I obviously would have to make my viewport a little bigger, but before we do that, let's just go back to the model and change some of those dimensions so that they actually will show. I could actually select all of the dimensions. I would do a crossing window, so clicking from right to left and cross through these dimensions, cross window and select all of these dimensions, cross window, remember I'm clicking once at the left button, pulling my mouse, I don't have my hand on a button, pulling my mouse and clicking the other side. I'm just doing a crossing through all of those dimensions. I want all of those to show at a different scale. Remember how we do that? Oh, hopefully. I'm going to go up to my Magic Quick Properties box. It is in the way most of the time. And I'm going to go to where it says Annotative Scale and click where it says 1/4 inch. Go to that magic box and I'm going to add the scale I want, which is going to add. And then I'm going to go down to 3/16 of an inch equals a foot. I'm going to say OK. And now all of those dimensions are for 3/16. I'm going to say OK. And notice I got bigger and smaller dimensions going. It's kind of hard to see, but now they are going for all of those dimensions. So now I'm going to go back to A3, and yeah, it doesn't quite show. My viewport is still too small. So I'm going to click my viewport, and I'm just going to basically pull those grips so I can see all of the dimensions that I want to be shown. Looks like this one needs to go a little bit further out, but then I can just move it onto my sheet, and it will still show all of those dimensions. Maybe this one needs to go a little bit higher. Notice something else that you can do. This viewport actually intersects with this one. The cool thing is those lines, remember, will not plot. So that doesn't matter if those two lines intersect. I just have to make sure that the drawing part doesn't intersect with anything in this drawing part. And it doesn't. It ends right here. It doesn't even conflict with the dimensions. So that is something you don't need to worry about. Just check to make sure your drawing part doesn't overlap something else in another drawing. But the viewport lines, they're cool. Let me show you one more thing back in the model, which is that magic button that I wanted to show you. So if I go back to annotate, there is the quick dimensions. It only works for a single long line. It will not work if I click it and try to get this entire wall. But let's say I want to dimension this wall over here. Before I do that, let me check my annotative scale. I'm now at 3/16 equal a foot, because remember we just added that one? So it'll only show up in my 3/16 drawing. That's okay, I could still add another one, but just be aware that I'm doing it at that scale. So I'm going to go to quick, and when I do that, all I have to do is select what I want to dimension. So if I select this line and hit enter, then it says, where do you want that dimension to go? Now, it's not showing me the dimension yet, but it's basically saying, where do you want it to be? So if I pull it out here and hit click, that's where it's going to go. Now notice it is conflicting with that little line there. So that is where I would click this and actually pull it maybe a little bit further out so that it doesn't conflict with that little line. It is great for overall dimensions, but not for little ones. Okay, so that's the quick. Now if I go back to A13, yes, it's showing up just fine. It will not show up on these because I didn't add that scale to it. So if I do want to add that scale, do you remember how we do that? Yes, of course you do. I go here and I just go to annotative scale and I say, you know what? I actually want to add the 1/4 inch. So I go to add, I go down to 1/4 inch equals a foot and say okay, and hit escape to get out of that. And then going back to A1 and A2, sure enough, it shows. Let me show you though, if I only wanted maybe this dimension and this dimension to show and not all the others, you can still do that. Do you remember how? Going back to the model, I would basically select either with crossing or selecting them, all the ones that I don't want to have those dimensions on that sheet. So if I only wanted this one and this one, I wouldn't select those, but I would select all the others. Okay, and then I could actually go to the annotative scale, sitting right here on my cursor, or right here off to the side, go to the magic box, and this time I could say I want to delete. So I would select this one and say delete. I only now want it to show for the 1/4 inch drawing. I hit OK, I hit escape, and then when I go back to A3, those other ones are not showing. So if I only wanted to show some and not the others, remember you can add and delete, not just add. What if for some reason you kind of sort of made a mistake? Let's say that you're doing these dimensions and you actually had this one here instead of lined up. Please, please, please make sure and line up your dimensions. So make sure, the easiest way is to hit continue. But if you forgot to do a dimension, you have to go back and add it and you didn't line it up and it's like this, there's a magical way to make it go back. Now, I could do what I just did and click it and pull the grip and make sure it snaps to that point, right? But there's another way, especially if you have a bunch of dimensions that are not quite lined up, like maybe even this one. Maybe this one is actually right here and it came off at an angle like this. The way that I would do that is to go to this magic button right here. This one is called Adjust Space, and just by hovering, you can see what it does. So when I click that, it asks me for my base dimension. What dimension do I want those to line up to? I want it to line up to this one. As soon as I click, I don't push enter, it asks me to select dimensions to space, or which ones do I want it to line up with it. I want this one too, and I want this one too. It'll let me keep selecting until I hit enter. As soon as I hit enter, it asks me, enter the value. Auto actually is not what I want. Auto does something different. It actually lines them up, spacing them evenly, like if I had 3 in a row. They would space them all evenly. So for this, I actually want to enter a value of 0 and hit enter. Soon as I hit 0 and enter, they all line up to the base dimension. I love that if I accidentally have one out of kilter. So make sure and do that if that's what happens to you. Otherwise, we are good